Hello, good afternoon. Today we're going to be talking about writing instructionally sound and legally defensible IEPs. This is the beginning of our PLC group meeting for special ed teachers, and I'm really excited to share this information with you. Before we begin, let me apologize. It is allergy season, and I have terrible allergies right now, so I'm a little hoarse. So let's first break some ice. We've got some time together, and even though we're all out for COVID-19 and everyone's at home, you can send me through text message. You all have my telephone number, or you can send me through email the answers to your questions, and I'm going to draw for a prize. The zombie apocalypse is coming. Who are 3 people you want on your team and why? Well, I would like to have Nick Saban, because he knows everything as far as how to make a group work. I would like to have Jesus Christ on my side always, because he is everything to me spiritually. And I would like to have my dad with me, because he can fix anything. What is your most used emoji? Probably a smiley face. What was the worst style choice you ever made? Oh gosh, shoulder pads in the 80s, hands down. What was the worst haircut you ever had? The uneven bob in the 80s, again, hands down. What movie or book did I read or see recently that I would recommend, and why? Well, recently I saw the movie The King's Speech. I know it's been out for a while, but it was just a wonderful story, and very cleansing, very hopeful, and something I think everybody would enjoy. So let's get down to business. Let's talk about the IEP process. You know, by the time you get to the point where you've gone through referral, evaluation, and we're to the beginning of writing that IEP, there's always some steps that we have to do. So to begin with, we always send a meeting notice. You can't do anything without inviting parents and letting them know that you're going to be doing something. They always need to be a part of every decision that you make. And you do that by sending a meeting notice. You have to document 2 attempts to contact that parent about the IEP meeting. In a perfect world, we have parents that really want to be a part of what's going on with their students, and then there are some who need a little extra push. So we need to use those 2 attempts wisely, and those can be written, those can be email, those can be telephone calls. You need to make sure that you document it. You need to make that IEP individualized. We don't need cookie cutter IEPs. Do not copy and paste, because every child is different. Now, here's a pet peeve of mine. Let's make sure our grammar is correct. Grammar needs to be correct on an IEP. You all went to college. We all know how to do this. And if we don't, we have spell check and grammar check. We need to make sure that parents understand their role in the IEP process and that their concerns are always considered. We need to make sure that IEP team members understand their role. For instance, you might need to have a little training with your gen ed teachers and say, look, here's what I need you to bring with you to this meeting. If you could bring some skills that you see the student does well, some interesting facts about things that we might not know about the student, how he acts in your classroom, things that we can use to plan appropriately for his next IEP. We need to make sure that we have data to back up all our decisions. That goes back to that gen ed teacher as well. If she's got some data or he has some data that we can use, then we definitely want to use that. So we want to make sure that we have that. We need to make sure that we can defend everything that we put into or that we don't put into that IEP. Everything has to have a reason behind it. It needs to be cogent and responsive in explanation. And it's very important that we're able to explain that when we sit down with parents. In your handout packet, which you all have, is a very thick packet, and you've got a copy of every sheet that I'm talking about in our presentation. The first one is our notice of invitation to a meeting with consent for agency participation. Now you can see that there are several boxes that need to be checked. You need to check what the purpose of the meeting is for. Who all is going to be in the meeting. It's very important to overcheck on the side that says what the purpose is for, because you can overcheck it and still not talk about it. But if you don't check those boxes and tell the parents that's what we're going to talk about, you can't talk about it. For instance, if you get into a meeting and you want to discuss collecting some additional data, if you didn't put that down, that might be a possibility of what's discussed under this purpose of the meeting is to section, you can't talk about it. So we want to make sure we overcheck on that side. The next parts of this is pretty self-explanatory. You're basically, it's the way to document how many times you've tried to contact that parent. The parent will sign it, say if they're coming or not, if they want to reschedule, if they want to choose another time, that's totally fine if they're letting you know. We reschedule as many times as parents want us to, if they let us know in writing or verbally. Just because they've rescheduled 3 times and it makes you upset, it's annoying to you, does not mean that we don't reschedule it. We always reschedule a meeting if a parent requests it. Moving on, look at your front page of your IEP. Now your IEPs will look very different from this one because you're going to have each of these blanks filled in. Let's talk about each blank. Let's begin with the section for extended year school services. It first says that the IEP team has considered for this child, which is based on that administrative code section of the Alabama Administrative Code, that ESY is necessary. You can check here if extended year school services are going to be provided or if they're not necessary. How do we know if they're not necessary? If a child, a good rule of thumb is if after you've had an extensive break, Christmas break, spring break, Thanksgiving break, things like that, and the student has come back and been able to recoup their skills, that wherever they were when you left, whatever level they were on, they're able to pick up right where they left off and keep moving forward, or there's not been any major behavioral issues as a result of that break, then you don't really need extended school year services. Always check with your coordinator about that. You can call me, you can call Ms. Stevens, but always check with one of us about whether or not extended school year services is necessary if you're in doubt. On the next section, we talk about strengths of the student, parent concerns, student preferences. That's pretty self-explanatory. Results of the most recent evaluations. This is where you'd put in your information from your state testing, from your special ed referral process, your eligibility form, from any progress monitoring that you have had come up in the school year, you would put it there. Academic, developmental, and functional needs of that student. This is where you would look at how do they function? Are they potty trained? Do they need help walking from room to room? Are they ambulatory? Do they need assistance in the lunchroom? There's all kinds of things that could go right here, and those all fall under that category. Now the next box is other, and gosh, that it's wide open what you use that for. This is where I would suggest that you document any information that doesn't fit anywhere else. This is where you ought to put it. And then down at the bottom, it talks about transitioning from early intervention to preschool. You ladies that I'm talking with, you guys don't do a lot of preschool because we're not part of the preschool part. You're all elementary and secondary teachers. So you probably would not be filling any of that out. But in the off chance that you move to a different position, this is where you would record information about preschool or early intervention. Second page through the profile pages are sections right here where we talk about the special instructional factors. One major thing to remember is if the child has a behavior that impedes his or her learning, you check yes. Do they have a behavior plan? Check yes. If they're working with a BCBA, then you most definitely would probably check yes on that section because they're going to have behavioral issues. You discuss limited English proficiency. Do they need Braille? Are there communication needs, assistive technology? And this is a big one. Are they working toward achievements in the Alabama Alternate Assessment? Now, we don't call it that anymore, but the State Department forms have not caught up with what the name of the test is yet. So it still says Alabama Alternate Assessment. That's where you would check that off. If transitions services are discussed, you check it here. Transportation. Sometimes students have transportation as a related service if they ride one of our special education buses, and this is where you would document that. Down here, the next part where it says non-academic extracurricular activities, you document whether or not they can go to these things. Now, if you've got a student, particularly an elementary student, they're going to need some adult supervision. You know, kids can go and do things on their own, but in elementary school, we tend to have our eyes on them all the time, and that's important. So this is where you would document if they're able to do that. And then in our system, we send home a progress report every 9 weeks, and we fill that bottom page form blank, out to reflect that. Now, for you secondary folks, and this usually doesn't happen until they begin to start age 16. I used to tease parents and say, well, they don't drive yet, so we're not talking about this yet. But that's true. This part begins at age 16. And when you're talking about transition, we're looking ahead to plan what's going to happen once they exit us. Transition's very important for our secondary students. You've got to have transition goals, talking about what their education training is going to be, their occupational or career goal might be, community or independent living goal. We use these from our resource students who need the least amount of services all the way to our low incidence students who need many services. You can look up transition standards on the Alabama Transition Standards link from the ALSDE State Department website and the Transition Handbook. If you need a copy of this handbook, we've provided one, I believe, to each school. And if you need another copy of that, please let me know and we'll get you one. Let's talk about the annual goal page. The annual goal page is very important. If you look in that first box, it's talking about the present level of performance. This is where you record how well they can do what they can do in this box. For instance, if you're talking about a student who is in a low incidence classroom and they know 5 letters, or maybe they know the letters of their name, this is where you would record that. Down below, there's the section about measurable goal. You use the Alabama Curriculum Guides or the Alabama Extended Standards to help you choose what your goals are going to be. Those are really easy to follow, and the State Department has put 2 links on the pages that you can click on when you're in sets. Those are in blue if you can see them, and you can use that guide to help you choose which goal comes next. Talk down here about how you're going to evaluate that goal. Are you going to use curriculum-based assessment, data collection, teacher text test, teacher observation, grades, work samples, state assessments? You've got some choices here, but it's very important that if you choose teacher observation, it's not something that you're just looking at them or eyeballing them. You've got to have something written up to back up that teacher observation. So anything that you click on right here, you've got to have some concrete hard evidence to back it up. The easiest one to me is data collection, because you can use your progress monitoring for that. State assessments is easy as well because you've got the results of that. But many times our state assessments, when we're looking to do our annual reviews at the end of the school year, like we're in the middle of right now, our state assessments haven't come back. And furthermore, we didn't even give state assessments this year, but due to COVID-19, of course, but in years past when we don't have those scores back to tell us how well they did. So if you're going to choose state assessment, I would make sure that it's a way that you can get a print off from that. If it's Scantron, I think it gives you that information pretty quickly. But in the past, we've not had that. And the way the State Department likes to change assessments in the last 10 years, well, we might not want to choose that. Down below, you see where there are benchmarks. Now, I think it's important to have benchmarks because you're not going to go from 0 to 60 very fast with a student in special education. There are steps to get to where you're going, and it's very important that you hit each step. So I would divide the goal into the benchmarks, and I would use it as the first 9 weeks, the second 9 weeks, the third 9 weeks, and the fourth, so that you can see where they are and how much progress is made each 9 weeks. A way to align to the standards. This is something that we found at a workshop that Ms. Stevens and I went to, and it's talking about gap analysis for IEP alignment. This is a great chart to give you some good ideas on ways to make sure that your IEP goals are aligned to the standards. It gives you some very good information on how to ask and answer questions, identify the main topic, recount stories. This is one section of it, and it's also listed in your curriculum guides for special education. Let's look at this services page. This is probably one of the most important pages in the IEP. It documents the services for all special education instruction. Related services are documented here. Accommodations are documented here. You can share this page with general ed teachers, and that way they know what accommodations they're supposed to be doing or what services the students get. And it's the most important, as I said, probably the most important page in the IEP. You have to make sure it's completed in sets and that you're not filling it in handwritten or anything like that. But it is a legal binding document along with all the other pages in the IEP, and it's very important. Appropriate accommodations. You know, there are many ways to accommodate for a student depending on what their area of disability is. This chart gives you some good ideas on, it gives you a sample of one student's, how they strategically planned for his instructional accommodations. And you have a copy of this as a sample in all your handouts. Here's a blank copy for you to use as well, and it's pretty easy too. You're just picking out the student characteristics. What instructional task do you think goes with that? What's the purpose of the goal? And what accommodations you use or may need to use to help that student achieve that. Okay, the last page of the IEP is the signature page. Do not leave any pages, any blanks not filled in. Complete all the sections. Include all the participants, even the ones that gave you information but yet couldn't be there. Parents sometimes get a little antsy at meetings and they might get a little upset with us, and that's okay if they do, and they may not want to sign. Well, parents don't have to sign. If they ask to tell you that they don't want to sign it, document that parent attended but did not want to sign on that line. If you meet via telephone or virtually, document that as such. I have been attending many IEP meetings virtually since this COVID-19 crisis came to be, since the middle of March, and it's becoming a thing that it's kind of old hand now. We're getting used to it, and I can see us using this avenue in the future as a way to hold our IEP meetings when parents can't leave work or are unable to join us otherwise. If you do that, be sure you document it, and as always, complete it in sets with the typed signatures. And the sets will allow you to do that. And if you've been working in special ed, you know this. But at the end of it, when you print out your final copy of the IEP, attach the page with the original signatures to that IEP. Next is our notice of proposal or refusal to take place. And I'm going to tell you, if you have a due process filed against you, the first page that a hearing officer will open is this one when he gets into your sets file to see what's going on and what happened at the last IEP meeting. You complete this form after the meeting. Do not complete this beforehand because it gives the impression of premeditation on what was put into the document, and that's not what we want to do. We use the meeting minutes to help fill in all the sections from this. You complete it in sets, print a copy for your school file, and send a copy to the parents along with a copy of their copy of the IEP. An IEP amendment agreement. Now, I'm not real crazy about this form because I think it opens up a can of worms to make people think that, hey, we don't have to meet. Well, that's not true. We need to meet. We need to make every attempt to meet. But in those cases where we've tried to reschedule with a parent 3 times to add one thing into the IEP, and all we want to do is just amend it just a little bit, this might be something that we want to use. You use this form when an amendment is made to the current IEP and the parents just can't get there and don't wish to meet with you. You complete all the sections and send a copy home to the parents once they've signed it. Keep the original in the school file and complete this in sets, but please be careful using this form. This form can get you into some big trouble if you're not careful. I think this is one of the most important things, and these are our IEP minutes. Now, these are the ones that we developed and used this form for Etowah County. If you're coming from another system, they may use a different form, and that's okay. This is not a State Department form. This is just something that we came up with to record our minutes on. You need to use this to record what decisions or discussions take place in the meeting. You need to use this form. It's very important to have someone other than the special ed teacher to complete this while the meeting is happening. If you're a special ed teacher, you're leading the meeting. There's no way you can take the notes and write about it. So you need to find someone prior to the start to take notes for you. Be sure to have all the sections completed and keep this in the school file, because this right here, this form will make or break you when you have a due process situation to come up. You're going to defend everything you've got in that IEP. This is one more piece to the puzzle to make it a defensible IEP. An IEP agenda, I think that is an awesome thing. This is an IEP meeting agenda. You have one of these in your packet as well. Every student, it keeps everyone on track as the meeting is progressing. Gives you an idea of what's coming up next so that you don't leave anything off. You can check off each item as you go. Have an LEA to sign it down in the corner or initial it in some way. This again is not a State Department form. This is something that we came up with in Etowah County just to keep us going. And you have a copy of this in your packet as well. And I suggest you use it at every meeting. Do I have any questions or comments? If you do, and you don't see where you can email those to me, and I will do my best to answer those for you. COVID-19 has put a damper on our professional development this spring, but I hope that if you do have questions, you'll let me know. And lastly, teachers, go out there and let's just make a difference. Let's make a difference. The video that I'm going to show you is one of my favorite stories and that I heard from a very beloved professor that I had at Jacksonville State University, Dr. Cynthia Harper. She was my mentor in the early 90s when I got my bachelor's degree there, and she was an amazing woman. And this video, I listen to it periodically, and it just reminds me that even the children who you don't think are worthy, who may not seem interested, who may come from families that have more or have less than others, it's important to get to know your kids. One of my favorite superintendents that we had, Dr. Tommy Bice, a few years ago, state superintendent, I had the good fortune of getting to hear him speak one day, and his major theme through his talk was get to know your kids, know what's going on at home, know what's happened in their past, read that file, ask those questions, meet with those parents, get to know that child, because you never know how your presence in their life is going to affect them overall. And you got to ask yourself, do you want to be a positive or do you want to be a negative? Do you want to really make a difference in that child's life or not? And if you don't, then you're in the wrong field. So I hope that you will watch the video. When you see it, click on the link, and I'm going to do that right now so that we can all watch it. It's a story about more than kindness. about the essence and the power that compassion offers all humanity. And I love that line. So this concludes our presentation today. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you will go out there and find your Teddy in your classroom. Who's your student that's going to change you and change the way that you teach and the way that you do things in your classroom and maybe the way you do things in your life? Who's that person going to be? We have a lot of paperwork to do. We have a lot of stuff to do that just isn't fun as teachers and educators, as administrators, we do too. But the important thing is to not let all that change us and not let that change the reason why we chose to be in this field in the first place. And we all chose it because we love children and we care about the future of our world. And we know that those kids are going to be our leaders tomorrow, and you just never know what heights they can reach just by somebody being kind. So go out there and be kind. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next time.